with that, Leo, how are you today?
Howdy. Yeah. Hi, folks. Leo from Graphistry, and I'm going to share a little bit about vibes investigating and how it relates to how we do vibes coding. So, yeah, and if anyone's at Black Hat this next week and wants to chat about this stuff for DEF CON, I will be around. So, what I'm going to show, I'm going to do an example from Cousteau Detective Agency. If you've done Splunk Boss of the SOC, it's the same thing. And it's actually the same way our team does vibes coding. So our team is like one of those, I think like 5% of the cloud code users are basically max out their quota every day. So our team is very much that kind of team. So like we're definitely, we don't have one agent running. We always have like multiple. And it's kind of the same thing when we do the investigation stuff. And so if you've never done one of these CTFs before, this one's a question from the Splunk boss of the SOC. So Bud accidentally made an S3 bucket publicly accessible. What's the event ID and what's the API call that enabled public access? Cousteau is actually a lot worse, where it's like these puzzle hunts. So it's almost like poetry, and you barely even understand the question. While the Splunk ones are more like it's very clear what the question is, but it's actually just leaves out a lot of context. And so you're like, well, there are multiple S3 buckets. Which S3 bucket are you talking about? That kind of stuff. With all of them, the key is, and I'll be talking about plan files, and the key is that instead of us, like basically the trick is like, how do you make a thing spin for like 5 minutes, and then you come back and you have multiple of these questions running in parallel, and that's kind of how we do the speed run. And so it's not that we're like getting assisted; it's like we want to come in switching every few minutes between like different sessions. So if you have something like Claude Code, we have like a public repo where, and actually basically increasingly all our open source repos, you can kind of go to our AI folder and you'll see these like prompt templates. So what I'm showing you here is like we just put in our open source folder. So if you do Claude Code, you could do the same thing. So I'll go over this in a second, but I want to show an example where uh, actually I'll show two examples, but the first one is uh, like for example, we're fixing some in the code side, some lock in some Docker file, but you can see that it is sort of not do we have a plan file, but it's actually maintaining the plan file as it goes, and it's sort of self-generating. And so as the prompt template goes, it's like imagine you had like a really tiny helper, and we're kind of every step we're like which branch, what time, all that stuff. And so if we ever have to reset, this is all kind of here. Now, what's kind of interesting is from an investigation side, where instead of dealing with code, we're dealing more with like data. Now, imagine you have an MCP hooked up in Claude. We do Louis, where we have these kind of a little more we call like a semantic layer of over all the different databases. And so in this case, for example, let me do the I guess for Cousteau. So let's say we have a connection to a Cousteau cluster. It basically works the same way, and so we have a template. So in this case, we call them data threads. So I'm gonna just like read the hunt template from the data thread and then use it to power the question. And so instead of having like what's kind of interesting is instead of having like we like to say like a prompt template is worth like 1,000 playbooks. So instead of having a bunch of them, we actually one of the things we're trying to figure out is like we just have a few very generic prompt templates that can just kind of spin for like 5 minutes and just do most of the work, and then we can come in later. So this one, so we load it in, we just reference it. The agent will figure out to read that file. It's just Markdown. So basically programming in Markdown, kind of like you saw in the other one. And then in this one, we're doing some other question that it broke down to. And you saw that it kind of spun for a while. We can kind of see it kind of read in the template. It's kind of like a Jupyter notebook. So the same thing, Cloud would do the same thing. This is actually a very minimized one, but basically it spun for a while, generated database queries, did some data frame stuff, did a couple iterations of, and then it finally came out with, in this case, was the right answer. Yeah, so like this kind of, what's a little interesting to me is that when we're coding, when I do these, let me jump to this one, when we do these prompt templates, it's more about having, it's a little bit of just like a forward only validation where we just have like, oh, does it do lint, does pass lint type unit tests, it's generating its own tests, things like that. And that's pretty straightforward. But when we do these investigation templates, it's a little, this is a very minified form. Our real ones are about maybe 1 or 2 pages. we kind of have like levels where it's like strategy and then tactics, and then within it, like for example, validation is actually really hard. And so in normal coding, you can kind of just test the program and let it run. You have some notion of unit test, but in investigating, you don't really know what the answer is or how to like you don't really know what the answer should be. And so one of the things we end up doing is actually, sorry, this is Leo. Yeah. One of the things we end up doing is instead of saying, hey, does it pass the unit test? We actually have it say, hey, come up with a cross validation and actually make it a cross validation when you run code. And it should use a different table, or you should find a different way to validate it. So actually both comes with the validation condition and making it programmatic. And so there's like a lot of like little interesting tricks there. But it's actually been pretty surprising where like, for example, I like how the Splunk Boss of the SOC team split up. So like if you haven't seen Boss of the SOC or ever tried the CTF, it's a lot of basically like incident response, tier one, tier two type of stuff, like phishing malware. And they kind of split it up as sort of like 200 level and 300 level challenges. And what we found is we can actually, with a pretty generic template, basically do roughly 100% of the 200 level challenges in about each one about 2.5 minutes instead of the normal, like 10, 15. And we actually, surprisingly, to me, was like we could do about maybe 50% of the 300 level, just again, using the same generic template. So yeah, like again, if anyone's around Black Hat, happy to, you know, talk about this stuff where it's been like I think a lot of people talk about like workflows and kind of Python driven templates and like LangChain and stuff like that. But anyone who's kind of done serious vibes coding in like Cloud Code and stuff, you kind of know that you program in prompt templates nowadays. So it's all like natural language and self-generating prompts. And so to me, it's been kind of surprising how far kind of purely agentic can kind of how much distance they can make. So yeah, I'll be around Thursday for DEF CON 2 as well. So I won't be able to go all the way, but definitely hit me up. Anyway, yeah. So again, just hit me up or whatever. It's been pretty wild so far.
Thank you very much, Leo. Really appreciate it.